Democratic Forces, ADF, to attacks in Jugu territory by the Convention pour la Révolution Populaire, CRP, and Zaire militants, as well as continued attacks in Masisi territory by the M23, the human cost of this conflict continues to grow with increasing deaths and injuries, mass displacement, hunger, disease, sexual violence, and destruction of civilian infrastructure. It is therefore critical to strengthen diplomatic efforts to end this conflict in all its dimensions. Accordingly, the A3 Plus would like to emphasize 3 key points. First, the A3 Plus expresses its deep alarm over the continued attacks by the M23, ADF, Coreco, and other armed groups, despite existing ceasefire agreement. We call for thorough and impartial investigations into all atrocities committed by armed groups in the DRC and for perpetrators to be held accountable. We remain disheartened by the fact that the peace agreement has yet to produce tangible improvements on the ground, and that the Congolese people continue to bear the heavy cost of the prolonged instability and violence in the east of the country. Second, the A3 Plus reiterates its firm belief that a political solution is the only viable path to sustainable peace in the DRC. We are encouraged by the ongoing regional efforts, which laid the foundation for signing the peace agreement between the governments of Rwanda and the DRC. We stress the prominent role of the African Union and sub-regional mechanisms in reaching a sustainable solution to the conflict in the eastern DRC under the leadership of President Faure Gnassingbe of the Republic of Togo. We also welcome the complementary facilitation efforts of the United States government, as well as the continued mediation efforts between the DRC government and the M23 under the patronage of the Emir of Qatar. We also welcome collaboration efforts between regional actors and the Special Envoy of the Secretary General for the Great Lakes region, Mr. Wanju, including recent inaugural Joint Security Coordination Mechanism meeting, which was held early of this month as part of the peace agreement implementation. Third, we are gravely concerned by repeated ceasefire violations in Eastern DRC. We therefore call for the establishment of a credible and robust verification mechanism to monitor implementation of the peace agreement. The ongoing violations of the ceasefire agreement only exacerbate the already troubling humanitarian situation. In the context of World Humanitarian Day, which was marked on Tuesday, we honor the sacrifices of humanitarian workers and reaffirm our solidarity with the people they serve. We urge the international community to scale up its support to the Congolese population, and we call on all armed groups to fully comply with international humanitarian law, including by ensuring unhindered humanitarian access. In this regard, we specifically urge the M23 to leave the daily curfew imposed on civilians in Rushudu territory. The cost to civilians is high. In conclusion, Mr. President, the A3 Plus reaffirms its solidarity with the people of the Democratic Republic of Congo and a strong commitment to the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of the DRC. We remain committed to supporting all initiatives aimed at ending the crisis. The international community must maintain momentum and diplomatic pressure to ensure lasting peace in the DRC. I thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for the statement.
La palabra a la delegación.
I now give the floor to China.
President, I thank you for convening today's meeting. I thank Assistant Secretary General Poby for her briefing and welcome the representatives of both the DRC and Rwanda to today's meeting. The conflict and violence in Eastern DRC are persisting unabated, taking a fresh and continuing toll on civilian lives. This is worrying. The international community must do more to de-escalate the situation and help restore peace in the region. I'd like to make the following points. First, violence against civilians is unacceptable. Reports indicate that over the past month, armed groups in eastern DRC have repeatedly attacked civilians and destroyed civilian infrastructure, leaving hundreds of deaths in their trail. China stands against these attacks and condemns them and supports serious investigations into them to establish accountability. The international community must urge all armed groups in eastern DRC to respect international humanitarian law, desist from violence forthwith, and engage in disarmament processes, as well as supporting the DRC in protecting the lives and property of civilians, including foreign nationals. We mustn't allow civilians to fall prey to conflict. China reiterates its support for the DRC government's efforts to uphold sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity. Second, the momentum for dialogue and negotiation should be maintained. The recent positive engagement between the DRC and Rwanda created a promising momentum, which China welcomes. The international community must, as a matter of urgency, call on both countries to fulfill their commitments and obligations, including those under the Security Council Resolution 2773 that was adopted by consensus, and work together towards a political settlement of the conflict. Facilitators of the peace agreement between the DRC and Rwanda must honor their respective duties to see to it that the situation on the ground genuinely improves and the processes are not stalled. China commends Qatar's mediation efforts leading to a signing of the Declaration of Principles between the DRC and the M23 movement. As the Doha negotiations enter the most critical and challenging phase, China calls on M23 to cease hostilities and engage in bona fide dialogue with the DRC government. We look forward to Qatar working on both parties to conclude without delay a lasting peace agreement that addresses the root causes of the conflict. The African Union and sub-regional organizations have long been working to end the conflict in eastern DRC. The international community should support a greater role for the UN and these regional mechanisms. Third, the humanitarian crisis in the region demands urgent attention. Continued violence in eastern DRC has displaced millions, exacerbating the humanitarian situation in the region, especially for vulnerable groups such as women and children. In the current context, there is no time to lose to ensure humanitarian access, and scaling up humanitarian operations is all the more urgent. The international community should support the reopening of Goma and Kavumu airports to deliver essential food, water, and medical supplies, and help displaced people return home. The UN has repeatedly warned of severe funding shortages for humanitarian response in the region. Traditional donors must fulfill their international obligations and urgently fill the funding gap to alleviate the suffering of affected populations. President, Eastern DRC has been plagued by conflict and violence for too long. The protracted conflict not only destabilizes the DRC, but also undermines regional peace and development. Countries in the region are and always will be neighbors, and as such, they sink or swim together. Only by rejecting force, enhancing cooperation, and pursuing joint development can peace be preserved, stability promoted, and prosperity shared. The international community must continue to act impartially and responsibly to help restore peace in the region. China remains ready to continue working constructively to this end. Thank you, President.
Agradezco a la delegación de China su declaración.
I thank the representative of China. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. I thank ASG Poby for her briefing, and I welcome the participation of the representatives of DRC and Rwanda in our meeting. I will make 3 points. First, the United Kingdom welcomes the positive momentum towards peace generated by the work of EAC SADC and the AU, the signing of the peace agreement between DRC and Rwanda in Washington, and the Declaration of Principles between DRC and M23 in Doha. Second, the UK condemns the widespread killing of civilians by the Rwanda-backed M23 in Rutshuru territory, as well as killings by ADF in Ituri province. The scale of human rights abuses, including sexual violence, by armed groups in eastern DRC is deeply concerning. We call on all parties to respect international humanitarian law and to protect civilians. The parties must comply with the ceasefires to which they have committed. Reported violations by both M23 and Wazalendo groups are deeply concerning, as is the rise in inflammatory rhetoric by both sides. The UK urges the parties to show restraint, avoid further escalation, and engage constructively in the peace process. Third, President, the UK remains concerned by restrictions imposed on MONUSCO's freedom of movement by M23. UN peacekeepers must be allowed to deliver the mandate agreed by this Council. We welcome news that supplies of fuel and water are no longer being restricted. And we also welcome that some of MONUSCO's necessary troop rotations have now taken place. This must be sustained. To conclude, the United Kingdom strongly supports all efforts towards peace in Eastern DRC. We commend the ongoing efforts of US, Qatari, and AU mediators and facilitators. We welcome the resumption of talks between DRC and M23. The parties should now urgently and fully comply with the commitments they have made to a ceasefire and the protection of civilians. The Security Council should remain seized of their progress. The full implementation of these agreements is critical to delivering the sustainable peace and prosperity that the people of DRC deserve. Thank you.
Agradezco a la
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Greece.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank also ASG POBI for your comprehensive briefing and also welcome the participation of the representatives of the DRC and Rwanda to our meeting. Mr. President, we gather at a moment of urgency. The conflict and the loss of lives in the Democratic Republic of the Congo continue to drive civilians and communities deeper into despair. I wish to make 3 points today. First, Greece strongly and unequivocally condemns the killings last month in eastern DRC of a large number of civilians by the M23, backed by the Rwandan Defense Forces, and despite the ceasefire recently signed in Doha. We express our sincere condolences to the families of the victims and the government of DRC for what constitutes one of the largest documented death tolls since the M23's resurgence in 2022. We call on the M23 and its supporters to immediately cease hostilities. Attacks against civilians constitute grave violations of international law, and the perpetrators and sponsors of these crimes must be brought to justice and held accountable. It is more imperative than ever that the signatories of the Doha Declaration of Principles in July respect their commitments and maintain a permanent ceasefire, while continuing to work towards the finalization of a comprehensive agreement leading to a lasting peace. Greece reiterates its strong support and commitment to the sovereignty, independence, unity, and territorial integrity of the DRC, in line with international law and the UN Charter. The territorial integrity of the DRC must be respected, and state authority over all of its territory must be restored without delay. Towards that end, Security Council Resolution 2773, calling for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire, as well as for the M23's withdrawal from all controlled areas in eastern DRC, must be fully and urgently implemented. Secondly, we are very concerned by the spiraling crisis, its toll on civilians, and the ensuing humanitarian situation in a region riven by 3 decades of conflict. Attacks of significant violence have followed also last week from the ADF in various locations of North Kivu, claiming dozens of lives, including women and children, accompanied by abductions and looting. We strongly condemn all violations of international humanitarian law and human rights abuses, and we are appalled by the mounting number of IDPs, with an estimated 7.8 million people forced from their homes, as well as by the shocking levels of sexual and gender-based violence and the repeated violations against children's rights. As we speak, a staggering 28 million Congolese suffer from acute food insecurity. In this regard, we strongly call on all parties to the conflict to protect civilians from harm and uphold their obligations under international law and human rights law. The delivery of aid, focusing on life-saving assistance for the most vulnerable, must be redoubled and reach all those affected without delay and restrictions. Third, we reiterate our full support to MONUSCO and its presence across DRC. We are especially concerned by the M23's continued obstructions to the mission's work in eastern DRC. Any continuing restrictions on uniformed personnel or movement of supplies and vital goods are unacceptable. The Council was clear when unanimously adopting Resolution 2773 that any attempts undermining MONUSCO's ability to fulfill its mandate will not be tolerated. We reiterate that attacks against peacekeepers may constitute war crimes and that perpetrators must be held accountable. Mr. President, it is time to end the vicious cycle of recurring violence in the Republic of the Congo. Greece stands in solidarity with the people of DRC and remains ready to work with other member states in employing all the tools at the Council's disposal to urgently address the situation and create the necessary conditions for a lasting peace. I thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación.
I thank the representative of Greece for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also thank ASG Martha Poby for her substantive briefing. I also welcome the representative of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda to this meeting. Mr. President, the security and humanitarian situation in Eastern DRC continue to deteriorate despite recent diplomatic efforts. The light of hope, once beamed through dialogue and diplomacy, is now darkened by the shadows of a stalemate. It is precisely at this moment that we must renew and intensify our collective commitment to lasting peace in this region. In this regard, I would like to highlight the following 3 points. First, Korea expresses its grave concern on the failure of M23 to uphold its commitments under Resolution 2773 and the Declaration of Principles signed in Doha on July 19. Instead of honoring its obligation, M23 has continued to launch offensive operations in Eastern DRC, violating the spirit and the letter of the resolution and its own commitment. Such actions only undermine the progress made through regional diplomacy and compound an already fragile situation. We reiterate our urgent call on the M23 to immediately cease all hostilities and withdraw any unauthorized military presence from Congolese territory. We further implore both signatories of the Declaration of Principles, DRC and M23, to reaffirm their full and genuine commitment to the immediate ceasefire, and Rwanda to refrain from supporting M23 in any form and to constructively contribute to peace in Eastern DRC. Second, the continued and indiscriminate attacks on civilians perpetrated by the M23 and other armed groups in the region are utterly unacceptable. According to the OHCHR, M23 was responsible for the killing of at least 319 civilians, including women and children, last month in North Kivu province. We are also horrified by a recent Human Rights Watch report that M23 summarily executed another 140 civilians in July near Virunga National Park in an ethnic-based mass killing. Furthermore, a recent report by MONUSCO confirmed that at least 52 civilians were killed this month in attacks carried out by the Allied Democratic Forces ADF in Ituri province. The full compliance with international humanitarian law by all parties with a particular focus on the protection of civilians is urgently required. In this regard, we commend MONUSCO for its courageous and vital efforts to protect civilians under extremely challenging conditions on the ground. We are also deeply concerned by the increase in conflict-related sexual violence in Eastern DRC. Armed groups continue to use sexual violence as a tactic to assert control over this region. Accountability is desperately needed for all perpetrators. Korea is committed to preventing such violence and building peace, including through our contributions over $8.6 million to relevant programs implemented by UNDP and UNFPA. Third, my delegation urges all parties, national, regional, and international, to redouble their diplomatic efforts in pursuit of stability and lasting peace in Eastern DRC. In particular, it is crucial that DRC and the M23 return unconditionally to the negotiating table in Doha, under the mediation of the government of Qatar, and swiftly conclude a comprehensive peace agreement. The peace agreement between DRC and Rwanda, facilitated by the United States, has been developed through ongoing discussions, including the Economic Cooperation Framework. In this regard, we hope both parties will fully honor their obligations of lifting military measures in a set timeline and to continue strengthening the foundation of the peace agreement. We also encourage active engagement from regional mechanisms, including the AU and the EAC SADC platform, to help realize a brighter, more peaceful, and more prosperous future for the DRC. I thank you, Mr. President.
Agradezco.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, President. I also thank ASG Pobi for her briefing. Mr. President, Slovenia reaffirms its strong conviction that sustainable and lasting peace in the DRC can only be achieved through genuine dialogue, inclusivity, and the political will of all actors. We have consistently underlined the importance of good faith engagement, regional cooperation, and full respect for international law in the efforts to resolve the conflict. We welcome the signing of the Washington Peace Agreement between DRC and Rwanda, but stressed that its true value depends on the sincerity of its implementation. In this regard, the Council has been very clear in urging the DRC and Rwanda to honor their obligations and commitments in good faith and in line with the Resolution 2773. We further welcome the recent progress in the Doha talks facilitated by Qatar and the signing of the Declaration of Principles on July 19th. Together, this should bring a glimmer of hope that dialogue can prevail and that stability could be within reach. However, we continue to receive almost daily reports of most horrific violence against civilians. Slovenia condemns in the strongest terms the escalation of deadly attacks in North Kivu, South Kivu, and Ituri, perpetrated by ADF, Codeco, and the M23, supported by the Rwanda Defense Forces, as reported by the UN Human Rights Office. We are appalled by the brutality of these assaults, killings, abductions, sexual and gender-based violence, looting, and the deliberate destruction of the livelihoods. Particularly shocking were the massacres documented in July in Rutshuru territory, where at least 319 civilians were killed. Equally alarming were the attacks in Beni and Lubero in August, claiming more than 50 lives. These atrocities only add to the already unspeakable suffering of millions. So once again, we call on all armed actors to immediately cease all attacks and fully respect their obligations under international law, particularly international humanitarian law. We commend the efforts of MONUSCO in providing protection where possible and reaffirm our support for its mandate. At the same time, We stress the urgent need for safe and unhindered humanitarian access. Humanitarian aid must reach all those in need. Mr. President, I wish to conclude with Slovenia's call on all parties to the peace agreement and the Declaration of Principles to demonstrate genuine commitment to peace through action. Ending the cycle of violence requires political will, good faith, a clear track to accountability, and a clear prioritization of the protection of civilians. No true, just and lasting peace has ever been achieved without justice, and it cannot be achieved without respect for human rights. Slovenia therefore firmly believes that ensuring accountability for grave violations and upholding the rule of law must remain at the core of all peace efforts in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I thank you.
Agradezco a la
I thank the representative of Slovenia for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. Let me join others in thanking Assistant Secretary General Pobi for her briefing, and let me also welcome the representatives of DRC and Rwanda to this meeting. Mr. President, the situation in Eastern DRC continues to deteriorate before our eyes. What we are witnessing is a crisis defined by relentless violence, impunity, and immense human suffering. The horrifying targeted attacks on the civilian population in the provinces of Ituri and North Kivu, as well as escalating violence in South Kivu, is a stark reminder. Peace in Eastern DRC remains elusive. Denmark condemns in the strongest terms the recent attacks carried out by the Allied Democratic Forces in Ituri. We equally strongly condemn the killing of hundreds of civilians, including children, by the Rwanda-backed M23 in North Kivu. Such grave abuses are intolerable. They must stop, and they must be met with accountability. Mr. President, allow me to highlight 3 points. First, the peace agreement of 27th June between the DRC and Rwanda, facilitated by the United States, offered a rare but important glimpse of hope. Denmark joins others in urging the parties to do their utmost to engage in good faith and to implement the agreement in full. Likewise, we urge the parties to engage constructively and meaningfully in the ongoing talks in Doha. We recall that both parties have agreed to negotiation and to a ceasefire. These commitments must be upheld. Let me be clear, there is no military solution to this conflict, only a political one that is inclusive and representative of all Congolese people. We must also insist on the implementation of our own resolutions, especially 2773. In that spirit, Denmark reiterates our call on Rwanda to withdraw its forces from the Eastern DRC and end its support to the M23. At the same time, we call on the DRC to neutralize the FDLR. Second, Mr. President, let us not forget who pays the heaviest price in this conflict: civilians. Their suffering is amplified by recent deliberate attacks, humanitarian funding cuts, restrictions on humanitarian access, including through the prolonged closure of the Goma airport, and the looting of humanitarian and medical facilities. Meanwhile, needs are increasing. We reiterate that all parties in Eastern DRC must protect civilians and comply with their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law. We call for all perpetrators to be held accountable and for full access for and cooperation with international investigations and OHCHR. Justice is not optional. Third and finally, Mr. President, Denmark reaffirms our full support to MONUSCO as it continues to deliver on its mandate under extremely difficult circumstances. We remain deeply concerned about the obstructions of MONUSCO's operations, particularly in the areas controlled by M23. We call on all parties to respect the freedom of movement of the mission. Such obstructions are in clear violation of Security Council Resolution 2773. Mr. President, in closing, the people of Eastern DRC are not statistics. They are parents, daughters, sons, farmers, teachers, and traders. And right now, they are in desperate need of protection. They are in need of dignity and of hope. We urge the parties to the conflict to end the violence, to comply with their legal obligations, and protect civilians from harm. Thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación.
I thank the representative of Denmark for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Mr. President, we would like to thank Assistant Secretary General Ms. Marta Pobe for her briefing. We welcome to today's meeting the representatives of the DRC and Rwanda, the permanent representatives. At the end of June, we all optimistically followed the progress of international diplomatic efforts to assist a settlement of the crisis in Eastern DRC. However, reality once again showed that this large-scale prolonged armed conflict involving numerous illegal armed formations and regional players has its own path, its own dynamic, and it's very difficult to change this overnight. We note with regret that despite the clear positive results of the negotiations in Washington and Doha, threats for Congolese civilians have not yet been neutralized. Rather, in the eastern provinces of the DRC, there's a clear deterioration of the security situation. As we're well aware, over recent months, the horrific attacks by the M23 and the Allied Democratic Forces groups have caused hundreds of civilian casualties. We firmly condemn these unacceptable acts of violence. We express our condolences to the families and loved ones of those who've died and to the government of the DRC. We wish a speedy recovery to all those injured. We're also seriously concerned by the humanitarian consequences of the latest round of violence. This must be stopped. Millions of Congolese are tired now of suffering and fear for their lives on a daily basis. We reiterate that there is no military path to a lasting settlement to the crisis. It is only possible as a result of political agreements that would take into consideration the real interests of all parties involved. We hope that the participants of the negotiations in Doha will strictly comply with their commitments as part of the Declaration of Principles and will continue to work on achieving a comprehensive peace agreement. It's also important that Kigali and Kinshasa keep to their commitments that they officially took upon themselves on the 27th of June this year. It is clear that a precondition for stabilizing the east of the DRC is curbing state cooperation with illegal armed formations. This is clearly stipulated in the Security Council Resolution 2773 that was adopted unanimously by us, the key provisions of which, as we've seen from the situation, are still relevant. I'd like to remind you that these provisions are based on regional solutions drafted as part of the Uganda and Nairobi processes, which dovetail with the parameters agreed upon in the joint fora EAC SADC. We'd like to underscore the need, especially in current circumstances, of increasing the profile of regional players in the settlement process. In this regard, we welcome the merging of mediation structures of the African Union, the EAC and SADC into one mechanism under the auspices of the Pan-African Organization. We hope that its work will be productive in promoting peace and security in the Great Lakes region. Much in Eastern DRC also depends on the actions of the DRC government in terms of strengthening accountability and effectiveness of its national security sector and also its army and law enforcement structures, and also establishing state control throughout the entire territory. We're convinced that the UN stabilization mission in the DRC can and should make its contribution. First and foremost, it pertains to the need to increase the effectiveness of the work of peacekeepers to protect civilians. This will help to restore the importance of the mission's presence in the area of the conflict as an important restraint and deterrent that needs to be reckoned with. We believe that for this, there's a need quickly and completely impartially to draw some conclusions regarding the ability of MONUSCO to comply with its mandate, in particular in the context of what's happening in the North and South Kivu, what has been happening since January this year. Only comprehensively can all these measures lead to tangible results to stop the hostilities and to curb the threat from illegal armed formations and provide normal living conditions for millions of ordinary Congolese. Russia will continue to assist the settlement of the crisis in the Eastern DRC in line with the UN Charter and the relevant resolutions of the Security Council. Thank you.
Agradezco.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Pakistan.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would also like to thank Assistant Secretary General Pobi for her detailed briefing. A briefing which is a mix of progress and impediments, of grave concern, but also some optimism, and apparently all linked in one way or the other with the genuine commitment of the parties to peace. The continuing deterioration in Eastern DRC is a matter of grave concern for the international community and for this council. And we concur with Madame Pobi that the Security Council must bring its full weight behind the efforts for peace in the region. The recent violence and killings of civilians in the Eastern DRC by the M23, the ADF, and other armed groups are reprehensible. Such gruesome attacks on civilians are totally unacceptable. The perpetrators, organizers, and sponsors of these acts must be held fully accountable. These atrocities once again underline the grave threat posed by armed groups to peace, stability, and human life in the region. Mr. President, Pakistan, together with other members of the Council, welcomed the peace agreement of 27 June between the DRC and Rwanda, facilitated by the United States, as well as the Doha Declaration of 19th July between the DRC government and the M23, facilitated by Qatar. These developments offer an opportunity to restore trust and lay the foundation for peace. The real test, however, lies in their full and verifiable implementation. And as ASG Pobi noted, regrettably, the security situation on ground is not corresponding to the diplomatic efforts. We urge all parties to abide by their obligations and work in good faith. We also underscore the indispensable role of the African Union in advancing peace in the DRC. And let me also emphasize that full implementation of Resolution 2773 is imperative for peace. The M23 must cease hostilities, withdraw from areas captured and controlled by them, dismantle parallel structures, and engage constructively in dialogue. Any attempt to legitimize illegal control of territory by armed groups will only prolong instability. Pakistan reiterates its firm support for the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of the DRC. Mr. President, we appreciate MONUSCO's critical role under extremely difficult circumstances. The mission must be adequately resourced to implement its mandate effectively with complete freedom of movement. The hasty withdrawal earlier from South Kivu has had negative consequences, and we should not repeat such mistakes. As others have said, there is no military solution to the conflict. Dialogue and diplomacy remain the only path forward. Beyond the immediate crisis, addressing the root causes, especially the illegal exploitation of natural resources that fuels conflict, is also essential. Pakistan supports all efforts, all ongoing regional and international efforts, including those of the United States, Qatar, and the African Union. Colleagues, it is not very often to have such a congruence of efforts in support of peace in any situation. We urge the parties to seize this opportunity. Pursued in sync and implemented with sincerity and genuine commitment by all those concerned, we believe these efforts can pave the way to de-escalation, reconciliation, and a durable and comprehensive peace. I thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación.
I thank the representative of Pakistan for the statement. I will now deliver a statement in my capacity as representative of Panama. Distinguished members of the Security Council, we welcome the briefing provided by the Assistant Secretary General for Africa in the Departments of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs and Peace Operations, Ms. Pobi. We thank her very much for the valuable contribution. We also acknowledge the presence of the representatives of the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Rwanda at this meeting. Over the last few weeks, we have borne witness to a spiral of relentless violence in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And we have seen how the commitments that were undertaken in different rounds of dialogue have simply been cast aside. In July, the M23 perpetrated massacres that claimed the lives of more than 140 civilians, mainly in Hutu communities, in one of the most deadly episodes since the reappearance of the group in 2021. In addition to this, the Allied Democratic Forces, linked to jihadist extremism, have stepped up their attacks in North Kivu and Ituri. This has claimed the lives of at least 52 civilians so far this month. One of the most chilling attacks occurred in Commander, where insurgents burst into a church during a nocturnal vigil and launched indiscriminate gunfire on those present, killing some 40 people, including women and children. This is all the more alarming because it happened at the same time as peace processes that were recently agreed, and the commitments undertaken are simply not being respected. The bilateral agreement between the DRC and Rwanda, signed in Washington on the 27th of June this year, set out clear commitments. The need for foreign troops to withdraw in a time frame of 90 days, the establishment of a joint security mechanism, and operations against the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda. Nevertheless, the initial timeframes have already been breached. The joint mechanism has not met, the withdrawal of troops has not begun, and the operations to neutralize the militias have not begun either. In addition to this, on the 18th of August, the deadline for a definitive agreement between the government of the DRC and the M23 passed without a concrete result being reached. And although we do note the negotiations that have recently taken place thanks to the mediation from Qatar, the parties have not shown that they are pulling back on the ground. On the contrary, they're strengthening their military positions. This stark contrast between the commitments that have been signed and the reality on the ground is deeply concerning. And the territorial integrity of the Democratic Republic of the Congo are not negotiable. This Council has already on several occasions condemned the presence of unauthorized foreign forces and M23's attempts to impose parallel administrations. We repeat that any foreign military presence, unauthorized presence, must immediately withdraw. At the same time, armed groups, be they the M23, the Allied Democratic Forces, the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda, or any other, must immediately cease their attacks and abide by the ceasefires. Neighboring states with influence on the ground have the responsibility to act in good faith, refraining from any support, be it direct or indirect, that fuels the conflict. For its part, the DRC should step up its efforts to dismantle all militias on its territory, fulfilling its commitment to neutralize the Democratic Forces for the Liberation of Rwanda and guaranteeing its people's protection. On behalf of Panama, we categorically condemn the recent killings and all violations of human rights and international humanitarian law committed in the DRC. Impunity cannot prevail. The perpetrators of war crimes must be held accountable, regardless of their rank or affiliation. Distinguished colleagues, this Council must consider additional sanctions against those who finance or support armed groups. And the Council should also strengthen the monitoring and investigative mechanisms that can bring the perpetrators to justice. The people of the DRC deserve more than statements. They deserve peace, security, and dignity. We cannot allow the agreements to continue to be a dead letter while weapons are speaking louder than commitments. As President of this Council, Panama reiterates its commitment to active neutrality, defending the principles of the UN Charter, and promoting peaceful solutions. Thank you very much. I now resume my function as President of the Council, and I now give the floor to the representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. President, distinguished members of the Security Council, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the government and people of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, I would like to thank the United States and Panama for convening and organizing this urgent briefing. And I would also like to thank the Secretary General, His Excellency Antonio Guterres, for his constant commitment to my country's cause. In particular, I would like to thank ASG POBI for this morning's briefing. President, the east of the Democratic Republic of the Congo has suffered from war for far too long. Since 2021, the aggression of the RDF M23 coalition plunged our provinces into a humanitarian catastrophe, with some 7 million people being displaced. The apex was reached in January and February of this year, when the towns of Goma and Bukavu were invaded by the Rwandan Defense Forces and the terrorists from the AFC M23. Through its resolution 2773, which was unanimously adopted on the 21st of February 2025, your council demanded the immediate withdrawal of the M23 and the RDF and an end to all Rwandan support. Nevertheless, these resolutions have been completely ignored thus far. As we wait for the provisions of this resolution to be seen and implemented, we nevertheless welcome the leadership of the United States of America, who laid the groundwork for dialogue, which led on the 27th of June this year to the conclusion of a peace agreement between the DRC and Rwanda. This agreement sets forth the disengagement, disarmament, and conditional integration of non-state armed groups within the Congolese Armed Forces and the Congolese National Police. It also sets forth a security coordination joint mechanism and a provision on the respect for territorial integrity and an end to the hostilities. In the same spirit, the Democratic Republic of the Congo and the AFC M23 also signed in Doha, Qatar, a declaration of principles in the form of a preliminary agreement under which the parties committed to work together to find a peaceful solution to the conflict. The document sets forth the foundations and fundamental values that will guide the parties' efforts within the context of the peace process. It aims to establish a framework for future negotiations and to define common goals to achieve for peace and stability in the region. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank the State of Qatar for their devotion and their commitment to achieve peace in the DRC and in the wider Great Lakes region. President, in spite of all of these initiatives to achieve peace, we remain concerned, in the light of recent developments, concerned by the sincerity of Rwanda's commitment and their proxies in the AFC M23, who are determined to breach their commitments under the Washington Agreement and the Doha Declaration of Principles. And I would like to give you some examples of this. Firstly, in July of this year, more than 300 Congolese civilians were killed in several different localities of the territory of Rutshuru in North Kivu, in the wake of attacks carried out by the AFC M23 coalition, which flagrantly violates the ceasefire which was reaffirmed in the Washington Peace Agreement from the 27th of June, and also the Doha Declaration of the 19th of July. Secondly, the information that has been gathered by the competent authorities, which have also been corroborated by the OHCHR, set out that most of the victims, including many women and children, were defenseless civilians who were summarily executed. Just between the 2nd of July and the 2nd of August, these abuses also saw serious violations, including some 125 cases of sexual violence, hundreds of forced recruitments, including of children, more than 300 acts of torture, looting and arson, as well as the transfer of people into areas controlled by the AFC M23. Thirdly, the latest report of the UN group of experts on the DRC highlights the undeniable structural link between the M23 and Rwanda. It is clearly established there that Rwanda actively supports, militarily, logistically, and operationally, this armed movement. And this directly fuels the continuation of killings. It leads to widespread displacement of people, and it only worsens the persistent destabilization of the east of the DRC. This is a fact that was only further confirmed this morning in Ms. Pobe's briefing. President, these crimes have a clear ethnic dimension. Civilians, notably Hutus, have been targeted based solely on their ethnic background. It is therefore a deliberate attempt to use violence to change the Congolese social fabric. Given this evidence, the DRC asks this Council immediately to strengthen the sanctions regime, including the commanders of the AFC M23 and those responsible in Rwanda as well. Also to condemn the transfer by the AFC M23 of people into Congolese territory. By thus defending its own resolution 2773, the Council will be protecting civilians. It will re-establish the credibility of the peace process, and it will finally ensure accountability. This Council's recent history is full of examples where targeted sanctions were decided against parties who had been engaged in peace processes when they sabotaged the processes through massacres and widespread abuses. This Council has already shown that sanctions do not undermine peace. On the contrary, they are necessary to make peace possible. There's no reason why the case of the DRC should be any exception to this. By refusing to impose such measures against the M23 and their supporters in Rwanda, the Council would be in danger of endorsing impunity. It would be undermining its own resolution 2773, and it would only be eroding its own credibility and legitimacy. No peace process can survive impunity. Protecting human life is non-negotiable. Standing idly by as these crimes unfold would be a form of complicity. Protecting human life, including all communities, is non-negotiable, and it remains at the heart of any government's mission. The Security Council cannot stand by as impunity takes root. Justice and rigorous sanctions are necessary preconditions and not incidental conditions in order for the conflict to be solved in a lasting and balanced manner. For the Democratic Republic of the Congo, the priority remains to bring about lasting peace, and not a fictitious, ephemeral peace, as has been the case for some 3 decades. I therefore call on the Council, the main body of the UN responsible for upholding international peace and security, to ensure the full implementation of the provisions of its resolution 2773 of the 21st of February 2025. In this context, the guarantors of the Washington Agreement and the Doha Declaration should be encouraged to become more involved to put a definitive end to this senseless war, which is causing unspeakable suffering from the people of the DRC living in the areas controlled by the AFC M23. In this context, the government calls strongly on the Security Council to shoulder its responsibilities fully by mobilizing without further delay all necessary means for the effective implementation of the International Commission of Inquiry set out by Human Rights Council Resolution 37/1, which was adopted on the 7th of February 2025 during the 37th special session of the UN Human Rights Council. It's critical for this commission to shed light on all crimes committed within this crime of aggression, to identify the perpetrators unambiguously, including backers and accomplices, and to ensure that they are all brought to justice. It should also recommend measures to achieve accountability, including by sending information to the Council's sanctions committees to ensure that the conclusions lead to binding decisions and contribute to preventing that any kind of killings can be repeated, and this includes killings based on ethnic grounds. Thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación.
I thank the representative of the Democratic Republic of the Congo for the statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Rwanda.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to start by thanking you for convening this meeting, and I thank the Assistant Secretary General for her presentation, and I thank you all, distinguished delegates, for your statements. Rwanda reiterates its full support to the ongoing peace efforts, especially the Washington and the Doha tracks. Achieving durable peace requires commitment and constructive engagement from all parties. We thank the government of the United States of America, the government of Qatar, and the regional leaders for their tremendous efforts in this regard. In a tangible demonstration of political will, the Rwandan Parliament unanimously ratified the Washington Peace Agreement on the 29th of July, 2025. Together, the Washington and Doha processes, alongside the AU-coordinated EAC SADC framework, offer a unique opportunity to address the root causes of the crisis in a result-oriented manner once and for all. The conflict in the DRC directly impacts Rwanda both in security and humanitarian terms. Waves of violence and discrimination have pushed more than 100,000 refugees into Rwanda. Unfortunately, these are not spoken about as they should be. For 3 decades, Rwanda has defended our people against attacks by the Kinshasa-backed FDLR and their affiliates. It is therefore in Rwanda's vital interest to see the DRC peaceful and well-governed, the root causes of the conflict resolved, with the durable peace and prosperity achieved. This is why the Washington and the Doha processes are critical. This is also why Rwanda calls on the Council to lend its full support to these efforts and hold all parties equally accountable. Mr. President, today's session is taking place amid grave and utterly unfounded allegations against my country. Rwanda is ready to cooperate with any credible and independent investigation, as we have done in the past, including with the recent facilitation given to the Human Rights Council's fact-finding mission in the region. On the alleged massacre of civilians in Rutshuru, the initial reporting of facts has been contradictory, vague, and in many respects outright implausible. Only an impartial and independent investigation can provide the Council with a reliable set of facts to consider. And this is not undermining the channels of reporting by the UN entities. It is actually to defend the credibility of these entities. Rwanda cautions the Council against the risk of misinformation and disinformation, including by actors who are expected to uphold the highest professional standards. We are particularly concerned by the long-standing pattern of selective reporting of human rights matters in DRC, where victims are painted as perpetrators and vice versa. While there has been overwhelming focus on alleged violations by AFC M23, the United Nations Joint Human Rights Office and other actors have consistently neglected the documented and undisputed atrocities committed against civilians in Minembwe in South Kivu, Nhuro in Masisi, and in Ituri, including drone strikes in civilian areas in violation of international humanitarian law. Arbitrary arrests and mass detentions based on ethnicity, public humiliation, targeting specific communities, and the propagation of dehumanizing speech in schools and places of worship. Distinguished representatives, listening to the statements by some of the delegations in this room, I realized that this organized pattern of disinformation has far-reaching implications than we had even thought. There is now reference in the Security Council room to the ethnicity of the alleged victims. The report says the information was given by phone and satellite. Was the verification of ethnicity also established by phone and satellite? The Council is falling in the trap of the ideology of further ethnicizing the situation in the Eastern DRC. Calling for investigation is not too much to ask. Just investigate, or do the minimum, ask those who did the initial report to do a little more. There is a delegation that said, rightly so, that human beings are not statistics. The way it is being treated, if you end here, then you are treating them as a mere statistics. There is no information before the Council of who are those victims that we are talking about. How did you establish their ethnicity? Those are basic questions that the Council must ask. It is no accident that these campaigns emerge at politically sensitive moments, such as now, when parties are preparing to return to negotiations in Doha and are beginning implementation of the Washington Peace Agreement, including the neutralization of the DRC-backed FDLR. This group remains the principal driver of conflict, violence, and human rights abuses in Eastern DRC. Selectivity undermines the credibility of UN reports and the pursuit of genuine accountability. This issue has been officially raised by Rwanda at this council and with the Secretary General on multiple times. Rwanda is deeply concerned about the repeated ceasefire violations by DRC forces in recent weeks, including by Wazalendo and DRC-backed FDLR, units operating at the DRC government's direction, as well as credible reports of new military buildups in Uvira and the other areas. And what this means in terms of DRC's good faith commitment to the peace process. Additionally, DRC and certain countries with historical interests have downplayed or obscured the existence and the dangerous activities of their DRC-backed FDLR. Rwanda-backed AFC M23, in quotes, has been used here extensively. I did not hear a single delegation talk about Kinshasa-backed FDLR. Is it for lack of evidence that this group is backed by FDLR, by the Kinshasa government? I know you have a working methodology in the council where you adopt a language, but is there no objective criteria to adopt a language? Do you lack evidence, even within your own reports, that the Kinshasa government backs FDLR? Why don't you want to present it for what it is? Let me remind you who FDLR is. They are the people that are remnants of the people that were killing 10,000 people every day in 1994, when you passed the resolution 1912 to withdraw UN forces from Rwanda. They continued to kill 10,000 people on average every day when you passed the resolution 929 to provide safe passage to them when they were fleeing to DRC. Those are the same people that continued to pursue their intent. Forget about their military capabilities. The intent, in the spirit of the 1948 Convention, is something that must concern the Security Council. The question of FDLR in statements is treated as a mere afterthought. That is not right. It is central to the problem we have in the DRC, and it must be treated as such. We are also disappointed that the DRC did not agree to launch the concept of operations for neutralizing Kinshasa-backed FDLR at the first meeting of the Joint Security Coordination Mechanism on August 7th, but we remain hopeful that this will be rectified in the next meeting. I wanted to commit on behalf of my government that Rwanda will not be found wanting in terms of what we have to do to meet our commitments under Washington Agreement and whatever we have to do to ensure lasting peace in our region, in the Eastern DRC. So before I conclude, just one statement of a general nature. Yes, it is non-negotiable, the territorial integrity of the DRC. So is the territorial integrity of neighbors of DRC, including Rwanda. And the territorial integrity and sovereign obligations of any member country of the UN include fair treatment of citizens. Sovereignty comes along with obligations. The DRC must stop mistreating or treating part of their population as less than citizens. And the Council must take up your obligation to defend that central tenet of the United Nations. All people must be equally protected. The Council must take a posture where every victim and every potential victim is able to catch your eye. I thank you.
Agradezco a la delegación.
I thank the representative of Rwanda for the statement. The delegation of the Democratic Republic of the Congo has asked for the floor to make an additional statement. You have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President,
Le 21 février,
on the 21st of February 2025, when the Security Council was meeting in this very chamber to adopt Resolution 2773, the atmosphere reigning here in this chamber would suggest that the Security Council maintained the right to meet here and to evaluate the degree of the implementation of 2773 and to take significant measures in the case of non-implementation of the commitments by one of the parties. Today, I do believe that the task reserved to you is precisely this. You have noted, as have all UN system organizations, there have been reports about this given to us this morning. You've noticed that Rwanda and its M23 are undermining the implementation of 2773 and the various agreements that have been concluded to date. The Council, therefore, should shoulder its responsibilities. I'd like to come back just to one point, sir. It's not astonishing that Rwanda is undermining the reports of the massacres committed by M23. It's part of Rwanda's way of working, its MO, because it supports them. Today, Rwanda would like to put on an equal footing the so-called support of the DRC to the FDLR, but this is not true. When Goma fell and when Bukavu fell, and there are pictures of this, satellite images have shown this, there were columns of Rwandan troops entering Goma in broad daylight. Where did we see the FDLR supported by the Congolese army? We didn't see that. It's just not right. They want to exploit Congolese minerals. Rwanda does. Everybody knows this. Various reports have stated this. We're not going to keep you here for a long time because you're fully versed on this issue, but we believe that lies should not be cited anymore in this august chamber. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. President. Thank you very much, sir.
Agradezco a la delegación de la.
I thank the delegation of the Democratic Republic of the Congo for the additional statement. The delegation of Rwanda has asked for the floor to make an additional statement. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Well, briefly, in the interest of time, I wanted to reiterate that Rwanda will remain compliant with what we are supposed to do within the framework of Washington Agreement. And talking about Resolution 2723, it provides for what the DRC government should also do. So whoever has to refer to it must refer to it in its comprehensive form. I will not repeat to explain how DRC government supports FDLR because there is ample verified information available before the Council, available before the United Nations. So the proximity, talking about minerals, well, if we were able to confirm that Rwandan troops can walk to the DRC on foot, then you should also be able to acknowledge that we are that close to be sitting on the same geological rock.
Delegación de Ruanda.
I thank the representative of Rwanda for the statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.